Warning, this content may be upsetting or disturbing to some audiences. The plate sliced his cab with the sharpest angle it could possibly achieve. His skin was flapping off his leg. What's the worst workplace accident at your work? Back when I was a teenager working at Walmart, we had a huge dude start with us in the back room. The rest of us had no idea why they hired him for this kind of work because he was over 400 pounds. Sure enough, not even an hour into his first shift, we get a truck, and on our dock the crossover ramp has a small opening on each end. The dude steps in with his one leg and falls hard. He broke his arm so bad that we had no clue how we were gonna get him out. The ramp is about 15 feet in the air, and he was so big that pulling 400 pounds just using his one arm was impossible. So a couple coworkers had to go outside on a ladder and push him up while we pulled. He got his arm in an air cast and quit. Worst part is we were 4 days away from a free pizza party for 90 days of no work-related accident or injuries. My story is from manufacturing. The tops of ovens are pressed out of steel with up to 10-ton dies. One day a man tried to retrieve something from the path of the press, safety failed and he was crushed flat, from the waist up. Well, one guy was working on a cell phone tower and a high-tension supporting line snapped, which cut off his arm and head. That wasn't cool. Some girl didn't have her hair tied up per regulation and got too close to the conveyor belt. Scalped herself. You decide which is worse. Worked for Cessna Aircraft, guy working a punch press didn't remove the slugs and eventually too many were there. Shot out like a bullet into his chest, little aluminum discs about 2-inch in diameter. Think it actually hit his heart. Some years after that I was a bowling alley mechanic. One of the other mechanics at one of the other alleys the company owned, stayed late to clean the top of the decks that sets the pins down. Next morning, the manager came in and saw his feet on a lane, like he was standing there. When he didn't answer, she went back and found him dead. He didn't shut the machine all the way down and the deck tried to go back up with him between it, and the upper parts of the machine. They guessed it took a couple hours for him to die. Working in a coin mint. A guy was running a proofing press, this one actually puts the images on the coins, that was apparently on the fritz. They all have a laser fence that's supposed to stop the machine if anything breaks the beams. I was on the other side of the factory running a punch press, when I heard a terrible screaming from clear across this giant facility. My partner and I ran over there to a pretty effed up scene. This dude was doing single stamps on his machine, where it only is supposed to strike the coin once, and when he reached in to grab the freshly minted coin, the machine bugged out and did a double strike. His middle and ring finger were between the dies when it came down, and they literally made a coin out of his bone. I saw the coin, it was effing crazy, all the details were there from the die. Ambulance was called and, of course, he lost his fingers to the machine. Worst part was, the owner was trying to figure out a way to blame it on the guy, not his effing machine, so he wouldn't have to pay him anything beyond workers' comp. I left that job before the guy came back to work, but I imagine he sued the owner, and rightly so. The factory is closed now, which is a shame, since it was so old it had original dies from some of the first Nobel Prizes. I doubt it was related. Death warning, I was working a night outage in a large substation. There were 2 teams, testing and maintenance, and I was leading the test team. I was the main testing engineer and each time I scheduled a test on a piece of equipment, the station's maintenance group would also use that same outage to do some routine maintenance, clean, re-oil, etc. We had scheduled 2 outages, my team would be testing on one while they did routine maintenance on another, and then we would exchange. This is at 2 a.m., low electric load period, so easier to take outages, and as I am testing, I see a large light and a boom. I turned and at the other end of the station saw a glowing human body fly 20 meters through the air, and land in a glowing heap and amidst the glow, the hair on his head was on fire. Somebody tried to touch him and came away with his skin. The guy fought for 10 days and passed away. I checked the relays the next day, 50,000 amps had flown through him to ground. A fraction of an amp in the right place can kill you, 50,000 amps will cook everything. The stupid lead at that station had cut some important steps so he could go home early. For electric guys, half of a 220 kV disconnect they were performing maintenance on, was charged from the standby bus that they had not isolated. The lead did not check for charge, the union lead did not try to ground it, the lockout-tagout process was not followed. Medical student, I wasn't present for it, but a nurse had an accidental needle stick with a needle from contaminated with blood from an HIV+ patient. She took prophylaxis and didn't end up contracting AIDS, but that would have scared the crap out of me. Used to work at a warehouse. A dude I worked with went to pick an item off the top shelf that he couldn't see, and when he did, he got a face full of random cum. It was a fleshlight that someone else had apparently unwrapped and taken it to the bathroom, before putting it back on the shelf. Needless to say, the guy got a complimentary STD test from the company. Former work as of 2 months ago, but it answers the question, how the hell do you get injured working at a radio station? The building I worked in was old. Built in the 1930s. A piece of broadcasting history, and the birthplace of the career of the person who would go on to create the late-night television talk show. But while the interior of the building had been rebuilt and repurposed over the decades since, there were parts of it that were still crap. Most of the third floor was condemned due to pervasive asbestos, and there was an old roof access point that finally claimed a victim a few years back. This guy was one of our engineers. A few years from retirement, and an absolute joy to work with. Funny, skilled, and genuinely a good guy. One day he was climbing up through the roof access, and the heavy door, kind of like a hatch, broke loose and came down on his head. At first he seemed a bit dazed, but pretty soon it became apparent that he'd been badly hurt. He was rushed to the hospital, and while he survived, he was never the same. Never able to return to work. His plans to retire cut short, and he wound up on disability and having to live in constant pain. The company swept it under the rug. Only a few people knew the full extent of his injuries, and they kept it that way. Before I knew all this, I'd made a joke in the presence of the HR person about the worst injury that was possible at a radio station, and her head snapped around and she looked at me like, if you only knew. There was never any fundraiser to help pay for his care, or any celebration of his service to the company, or anything except silence. I'm sure he was taken care of financially as laid out in our, pretty decent, benefits, but they kept what happened really quiet, and that's a shame. I have two actually. Used to work in a supermarket deli. The first one, a girl opened the slicer blade while she was cleaning it, turned the slicer on, and then proceeded to slice the palm of her hand off when she wiped down the blade. Yep, that was an instant termination and a trip to the hospital. Next one, a guy stood on top of the fryer while it was on to clean the fryer vents, which were built into the wall above the fryers. He slipped and his leg went into 338 degrees grease up to his knee. He was also instantly terminated and got a helicopter ride to Tallahassee to visit the burn unit. Moral of both stories, use your brains and some common sense. It could save you a lot of pain and a job search. There was a 5x16 metal plate on top of a ladder. Guy moved the ladder and the plate came flying down at an angle. He was wearing shorts, and the plate sliced his calf with the sharpest angle it could possibly achieve. His skin was flabbing off his leg like how when you only peel one side of a banana, still attached but close to not. And so much blood. A guy cut his finger off on a bandsaw. I was off sick that day and didn't see that one, but another bad one I actually saw right in front of me was a guy getting his entire forearm sliced open by a steel plate that spun around while it was hanging from a crane. Worked as an on-site medic with an oil field company. Derrick Hand, works at the top of the rig, didn't tie on with his harness. Not sure what happened, but they fell from the top of the derrick all the way to the ground. They exploded from the inside, but didn't die. Being the medic, it was my responsibility to keep them alive. Ever try giving mouth-to-mouth to someone that's just oozing blood? Would not recommend. Long story short, they died. And now I've got hemophobia. Worked at trampoline park, and one of my fellow staff members did a flip to show off and snapped their leg like a twig. Now staff are not allowed to flip while on duty. Not my current job, but a previous one. I worked at a high-tension transmission tower construction. One guy was on a tower fixing one cable. The electric line was off, but a storm not so far was approaching. Somehow, the storm caused an induced shock on the line, and that guy, who was not with the proper gloves, got the shock and fell towards the ground. He was using a rappel rope and belt and did not hit the ground. He was passed out by some minutes before rescue arrives. Fortunately, he survived with just a dizziness. I'm a vet tech. One of my coworkers got bit in the face by a very large terrier mix. It tore open her cheek, took off the tip of her nose, and tore her lip so bad her gums were exposed. She only narrowly avoided losing an eye. I was bitten on 3 separate occasions by cats. Each time the bite got infected. All 3 cases involved unvaccinated animals with neurological symptoms and unknown histories. Prime rabies suspects, basically. My own worst injury happened when I was trying to help a paralyzed dog out of kennel. We had large kennels that closed with a fence gate. She was a large German Shepherd and pulled away at just the wrong time. The force pulled me down face first into the top of the gate's supporting pole. I'm still not sure how I didn't bust a few teeth. I looked like a chipmunk for a few weeks. I worked in a prison. An officer was sitting at his desk doing computer work when an inmate walked up and slugged him in the head, knocking him to the floor. The inmate then jumped on top of the officer and stabbed him multiple times with a homemade knife. Fortunately, the officer survived, but he never returned to work. The reason for the assault: the inmate wanted to be transferred to another prison. Small pudgy Mexican I work with thought it would be funny to drop the garage-style door just high enough, where only his 4 feet 11 inches self could walk under. Our 6 feet 7 inches employee wasn't paying attention, walking with his head down, and leveled himself by walking into it. He got a mild concussion, but the best part was we had shut down business for 5 minutes because we were laughing too hard to do any work. Saw a dude's finger get degloved while doing seemingly simple work, running lines in an MDF server room. He had on one of those nice tungsten steel wedding bands, and in an instant he fell, had no more ring, and had no more skin on his finger. When I married my wife, I sought out a silicone band to wear to work. It's not as nice as a gold or tungsten band, but if it snags on something, I'm only losing a $20 ring, not the skin on my finger. Plus I could get it in a really nice copper tone. My first job was at Panera Bread. While I was there, for just over 6 months, there were 2 thumbs cut off. Someone filleted his hand on the meat slicer, sliced his entire palm off clean. This was the same guy as one of the thumbs, but the other hand. I cut my hand on the tomato slicer, stored improperly and not connected, so the blade fell when I picked it up, and cut my hand on a knife on 2 separate occasions. Assholes I worked with kept throwing them in the soapy water and then laughing when I cut my hand on them. They were supposed to be placed in a special tray next to the wash water. It's why I eventually quit. Someone also had a seizure while holding a tray full of dirty plates and lacerated her hip when they thrashed on the ceramic shards from the plate she dropped. She ended up needing surgery because she bled so much. Thanks for listening to another disturbing episode of Radio TTS. Hit the subscribe button to become a scared ice cream sandwich, like the one in the right corner. Find the original Reddit post in the video description and give the authors some upvotes. And please share your own work accident stories in the comments.